I'm Dean Nelson. I direct the journalism program at Point Loma Nazarene University and host the Writers' Symposium by the Sea. And what a privilege to be able to hang out with Kevin and Donna, who I met a long time ago in another country.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, just 16 miles from here anyway. So anyway, Kevin, the executive editor of the Los Angeles Times, background at Dallas Morning News, Washington Post, ESPN's The Undefeated, which, thank you for publishing my story, by the way, about Kareem. So that was awesome. And Donna, syndicated columnist, you've been with the Detroit Free Press, which was the paper I preferred when I lived in Detroit, not the Detroit News. I read your paper right there. And USA Today and with the Washington Post. You still write essays and columns and things for them. And Donna has this really fine book. I know Kevin's written books too, but we don't talk enough about Donna's book called Brothers and Me, A Memoir of Loving and Giving. So anyway, thank you for being here. And I know that the Los Angeles Times has this marvelous history. It went from being a not so good paper there for a while, then the Chandlers had it, and we had Otis Chandler at our school, and it was just a really, really interesting discussion about the evolution, and then things happened, and the LA Times has reinvented so many times. And so that's sort of emblematic of how kind of journalism has gone, at least in my view. So what I want to start with a really general question for you, Kevin, which is, as a member of one of the kind of the legacy media organizations in this country, what are we still doing well? Let's start there.
You know, journalism has stood the test of time, right? It's been, you know, it's responsible for so much of the change in this country. Every major event in America has been chronicled by journalists all over the world. Everything has happened. And that's still going on despite, you know, there have been some attacks by people that don't like it and, you know, criticize us, but that's like a hallmark of really why we're still here, you know, to really tell the difficult stories. So one thing that is still relevant and still valuable is reporting. You know, finding out things that others couldn't find out if you weren't reporting. We have certainly a lot of new platforms and lots of people who will talk about news, but a really good example is just what's going on over the weekend, you know, in my city in Los Angeles, where the release of an audio tape that was a year old involving the city council president and some other members of the council and a head of a labor union made some racist remarks and other kinds of remarks, and that has really upended politics in Los Angeles, and that's through, we had a lot of reporting and great columns and that's done by journalists.
Right. However, well, I want to take you to my doctor's office where I was in there for my annual physical, and I won't go into any, you know, too much information here, other than that he said, "So you still teach journalism?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Why? Journalism is dead."
Yeah.
Where's that coming from?
Well, I think that sometimes there's a mistake about newspapers. I spent most of my career in newspapers, and with a brief interlude at ESPN and creating a digital startup at ESPN. But newspapers, just by the economics of our time and the kind of digital revolution that's made it more difficult to sustain a print product. I think something like 2,500 newspapers have folded since 2005. And so newspapers have had a difficulty. But all of business, every business has had to change and adjust in the digital era. And the thing that we have been able to do at the LA Times, man, it's not just everything you want to know about this city council fiasco, but we produce wildfire map. A lot of wildfires in California. You can find out through our map, it's a digital product, where the fires are, what's going on with them, the best routes. We also bring you everything you want to know about LA. You moved to LA, you want to know where the top 55 places to listen to live music, or the best breakfast burritos, the best hikes, we have that. We produce a short documentary series through LA Times Studios, uplifting local filmmakers. Do a lot of investigative journalism. We have a new magazine that's been revamped called Image, very much close to the culture of young people. We have lots of presence on social platforms like TikTok and Instagram. If those are the places you frequent, you can have an LA Times sensibility and people who speak on those platforms. We have a Washington Bureau and foreign bureaus and an investigative staff and a big entertainment staff. We cover the entertainment industry. We get film criticism, television. So you have a really well-rounded, robust collection of work and a lot of entry points to pretty much anything you need. And it's hard to get that in one place. I don't know anybody else who has that in the state of California.
So this is the misperception. I think when I think about the point that my doctor made, journalism is dead. When people think about the word journalism, some people equate that with the word newspapers, right? So newspapers, the hard copy that gets tossed on your driveway, that's going away. And yet you're talking about something that's very robust and present and covers an entire area.
And look, for those who still love newspapers, let me say I love them too. For those who love to hold on and feel it, and it's a beautifully curated product that men and women do every day, and it's organized really well. I used to deliver it when I was a boy. I love it. But the economics of the day of publishing something, printing it, running it off on printing presses, getting in trucks, delivering it to a doorstep, that model is not sustainable. And the reason we know it's not sustainable is because subscriptions are going like that everywhere, And so what you have to do is maintain everything that a newspaper gives you, but bring it to you in different forms. And we all are, it's a digital society. Everything's digital. Magazines are digital. Television networks are digital. Everybody speaks to a digital culture. Netflix is digital. That's just the time we're in, like a Kodak camera. We talked about that with some of our photographers the other day. There's no film and cameras, we used to do and take film. It's digital. And because that's all of society. So that's just part of the transformation. And for those who still get a newspaper, I cherish you, It's a premium product. I appreciate it, and appreciate the loyalty and commitment to it. But we have to continue to be kind of on a rocket ship to take the LA Times into what I would call a modern media company, not simply a newspaper. We have live events. We create one of the biggest food events that's all of America for a month, the Food Bowl, the largest book festival in North America, Festival of Books, LA Times. So there's a lot of ways to get people's interest. And if you subscribe to LA Times, and I hope people in here do, even though they're in San Diego, we give you a lot for that subscription.
So Donna, let me ask you a different kind of question, but it goes to some of the same issues. People like to read and be informed, in part because they want to be informed, but they also like to read a good story. And this is what you bring, oftentimes, it seems to me, and it could be about something that has happened in the world. It could be the death of Trayvon Martin. It could be any number of things, and you bring a perspective to some of these events and make it personal and make me care about it in a different way. Has that shifted at all as kind of consumption patterns have changed?
Well, thanks for saying that. And I want to say hello to everybody, and welcome. I'm so excited to be here and to hear how smart my husband is.
Hold it, is this a surprise?
No, one of the I did a little slightly controversial piece about the upside of the pandemic. And one of my favorite parts of it was at the end, I actually read comments. One of them said, "I must be an entitled white woman."
Wow.
Because,
that's how I'm going to start referring to
right?
you. I'm going to, yeah.
Because I dared to say that even in a piece that very clearly outlined how troubling and frightening and tragic this was, like everything in human life, there were good parts of it. And one part of it was that my husband was forced to move to Zoom. And we'd worked in separate, even when we both worked at the Post, we always worked in different locations. So if I'm in the next room and I'm listening to him lead and inspire and cajole and do all the things that he does as an editor, and my respect for him just skyrocketed because I got to hear that and see that up close. So.
And people resented your bringing this up?
Well, one of the reasons a lot of people don't read the comments is because oftentimes people are commenting who have not read the piece.
Right.
And who want to argue it's Trump Biden, it's climate change. No, it's just all these different arguments that have nothing to do with what you've written. One of the reasons I became a columnist was because I was struck by how often, no, actually by how rarely I was reading what I actually thought and what I thought people actually felt, the people that I knew, what people were saying about things that were happening. It seemed like there was a surface sort of discussion, and it drove me crazy. And so every once in a while, even though I was a reporter, I would have to feel I had to write some commentary that would say what I felt was the real truth, not just about how I felt, but the people that were around me. And even though I was doing that, Kevin was my boyfriend at the time, when I was asked to become a columnist, and I was like, well, no, that's not what I do. And
I'm a reporter.
And yeah, and also a terror of putting myself out there.
Yeah.
And because back then, everybody didn't have a platform. There was no internet where everybody, and Kevin says, and Joe Sausagehead is the thing he says, everybody and Joe Sausagehead has an opinion that they can put out, and many people will pay attention to that opinion, however false or crazy is the offering. But back then, it was a huge thing to be given a column, especially at the Washington Post. And I was just terrified of being that exposed and knowing that what I was going to write wasn't going to be what other people were writing. It was going to be more personal, I felt more authentic. And I went to Kevin and said, guess what Milton Coleman said to me? He wants me to be a columnist. He said, you were born to do that. And so I did that, and I think people do love a good story. I think people love a good story has great details. It draws you in because it makes you care.
Right.
Good journalism, good writing, good commentary makes you care. And so good stories will always be valuable. I think the authenticity will always be valued. And I think it's possible for me, it became, how do I tell my truth in ways that are not cruel, that are not, I just never wanted, as someone who grew up feeling invisible, as a black child and a Negro child, at a time when it's almost, if you're young, it's almost impossible to envision how different things were. When I was a little girl, you watched you remember the days when you turned on the TV and there were 3 channels? Some of you are old enough, and it was so easy. You just turn a knob and you're suddenly at another channel. And you don't have to get your son to show you how to operate your television. You know, some of you are 35 and know what I'm talking about. So back then, but the thing about it is, those 3 or 4 channels, there were no people of color, none. I lived in a working class neighborhood in Gary, Indiana, and everyone worked, everybody had their homes, and it was a very vibrant place. And so after work, people would be outside having conversations. You'd hear people calling people into dinner. It was just a very lively community. When somebody black came on television, someone would go to the door, holler out, "Sammy Davis Jr. is on TV," and the streets would empty, because it was an event to see, I'm not making this up, to see Sidney Poitier. There were only a handful of people, Sammy
Right.
Davis, the Supremes. Just these people's appearance was such a huge validation that nobody was going to miss it. So coming from there and having the world filtered through that,
This is the context in which you started doing your column, isn't it?
Yes, and whenever I look at one of the things, when a good story, I think people also appreciate a positive story, a story that doesn't make you want to jump off a cliff or curse somebody out or just slam the door and not be seen for weeks. We live in a world in which, before I came here, someone told me I can stand 10 minutes of news a day. And sometimes that's more than I can stand, because so much you're inundated with so much. You talk about one of the things we're doing wrong. I've never worked for a newspaper where I felt there was enough focus on the very real, very valid, very impactful things that people were doing that were good and that were kind and that were enlightening and uplifting and inspiring.
And this has been your signature.
Yeah, I tried to do that.
So I just remember reading about you becoming a columnist, and one of the reasons you said you wanted to do this, if you could write about what you wanted, which you were given the green light to do, you said you wanted to write about life, not death.
Yeah, life more than death. The thing that made me realize this was I was writing, as someone who can write with poignancy, I would get the dead kid piece. And I remember reading a piece, having to write a piece about a 5-year-old who'd been hit by a bus on her birthday. And, and I wrote the hell out of that piece, but I felt the hell out of it as well. And I knew that was not the only truth I wanted to write about. I wanted to write about my kids fighting over something nonsensical and yet teaching me something. Or our next door neighbor, and this is not a fun thing, but our next door neighbors in Maryland were, early on in my tenure with the paper, I became really good friends with Mary Jo, and she was a Mennonite from Ohio, and her husband a Mennonite from Kentucky, and we became really good friends. And their oldest was the same age as our middle son, and they became fast friends. So blonde, blue-eyed Jacob, and cool little Daryl, my son, and best friends. And so Mary Jo gets a call from the elementary school where they go to, and Jacob's teacher says, "It's hard to tell you this, but Jacob is saying he doesn't like black people." And Mary Jo's like, because you don't want to be the parent that gets that call. And she is a social worker who 90% of her, because of where she worked, 90% of her clientele was black. And it just made no sense on any level. Jacob was in our kitchen as often as he was his. And so Mary Jo goes to the school, Mary Jo and Tim, and they're sitting there red-faced, hoping not to be judged. And the teacher says, well, he just says this. We don't know what this is about. Can you talk to him? They go home and say, Jacob, sweetheart, we hear that you're saying you don't like black people. And he says, I don't. And Mary Jo says, but Daryl's black. And he says, no, he isn't. And she said, Donna's black too. No, she isn't. He knew that there was something bad about blackness. He'd heard or felt or had the water or the air. There was an understanding that that wasn't cool, but it had nothing to do with these people whom he loved, whose home he was absolutely at home in. And that's real. You know, and that's life. That's not death, that's life. And it's important to write that authentic story about life. And Jacob is so embarrassed. Yeah. You know, if you ever meet him, never tell him that I told you this story.
No, he's backstage. We're bringing him out.
Yeah, he's a father of 2 little girls now, and a very.
But these are the kinds of stories that are also important. I mean, what's happening in the city council in Los Angeles is very important, but so is this. And so what we like to think journalism still can deliver is both of this kind of news and story, right? So Kevin, let me come back to something you had said about all of these things that the LA Times is doing, all of these different sites, from live music to art to food to all that sort of stuff. There are also a lot of niche sites that just focus on food, that just focus on music. And even just from a news kind of perspective, there are all these niche sites that, like the Marshall Project, just deals with justice issues in the prison system. Or we have a wonderful site here in San Diego called Inquire First that just deals with water issues. So with all of these kinds of places that you could go to for that kind of specific thing, why do we need the LA Times?
Well, because we're the best. I mean,
moving on.
I'm
you understand why it's a rhetorical question, but it's not.
But part of it, that's the ecosystem that we have. The digital universe, the revolution, it allows people to try all kinds of things and to go after target audiences. We are a general interest media company, but when it comes to journalism, and it's really that craft of finding out things that people don't want you to know, of holding institutions accountable, wrapping your arms around the entire place, and also setting up as your civic institution. You're important to the place where you are. I don't know many people that do that. We're the largest news organization west of where I used to live, the Potomac River in DC. We're the dominant news organization in California. And when it comes to just journalism, reporting, I would say we're elite. You know, honestly, we're like Navy SEALs elite in that area. And I think journalism, to focus on journalism, it is important because everybody can't do that. It's really hard to report, and the judgment that goes into it, the nuance, that we're dealing with a lot of complex topics, whether that's a Supreme Court ruling that changes, that's on abortion and everything that means, you know, climate and trying to understand climate change. There's so much complexity, the divisions that we hold, how to live together as the demographics of communities change. These are all complex that require journalists who are there on the ground and with expertise and trying to chronicle and understand them. And I think not every place has that in abundance.
I think one of the other things that that a traditional news organization like the Los Angeles Times or the San Diego Union Tribune or a number of other of these more established places also have layers of editing. I mean, as long as you've been here today, you've been dealing with reporters and other aspects of different stories that are breaking in Los Angeles. I think that's a misconception also, is that journalists just write whatever they want and then they just post it. And that hasn't been my experience as a journalist. And so I want to hear from both of you, because yours is going to, Donna, yours is going to get a different kind of look from editors. But breaking news is going to still go through some filters, right?
I mean, at every level, editors are important. I think they're the most underrated staff that we have. You know, I think it's really hard to be a really terrific editor. They're at a premium, you know, and you constantly need more of them, and the good ones are really worth their weight in whatever the currency, crypto, gold, whatever.
But they aren't just fixing commas. They're actually challenging the writers.
Yeah, because judgment, the thinking part of it, how you craft stories and shape them, you know, and even before you get to the editing, so much of a great story happens before the story is done. You know, sometimes you also are taking work and managing stories in real time. It's the managing of so many reporters going out and scrambling to cover a major topic in your town. It could be a mass shooting. It could be, you know, it could be anything. Something goes wrong at a concert, and you have to make sense of things that happen. And your readers want to. They hear about something and they want to know, where can I go to find trusted, reliable information and understand it and have analysis and reporting and then commentary and all of the things that go with it, and feature writing and empathy, and there's a lot that goes into that's under the label of journalism.
Yeah, and I just don't think people appreciate, at least when I talk to the public about the role of journalism, I don't think they appreciate the layers of challenge and editing and back and forth that goes on before a major story is published. But now, Donna, with your experience, how have editors either made these really personal and vulnerable things that you write about, how have they made them either better or worse? Because you've had to go through something before it gets published.
I've worked at several papers, and I would always know there would be, at almost every paper, there's somebody who was really good, but who sort of scoffed a little bit at editing, and you would see it. You could see that in the work. I remember when I was at the Detroit Free Press, there was this really almost legendary writer who'd been there years, and so many years, and I read, and I liked his work, but I remember reading a piece of his, and I read the lead 5 times, and I didn't understand it. And I said, well, I have a master's degree, I'm fairly smart, and it just hadn't been edited. And he was one of those people that I know he had insisted that it made sense, and that it was probably at midnight, and the person was tired and said, okay.
Yeah, it's him,
yeah, that almost never happens at trusted mainstream news organizations. I was talking earlier about how the mortification, just the humiliation you feel when you get something wrong. I mean, literally, your eyes flying open in the middle of the night, and then you realize that you got something, you got a name wrong, and rushing, and hoping it's not after midnight when the last, and then it's going to have to run the next day. If you get it early enough, it'll be fixed for the next day's paper. But just the total embarrassment of that, and some of the news organizations that are very critical of mainstream news, of I don't know a better way to describe it. Traditional, long-standing, the news organizations that have survived, the big ones. and I tell people, if you wonder about what's real, look for, are there corrections? And one of the biggest ones, I looked to find, were there any corrections for stories that they had done? I found one over a 5-year period. You do that at the Washington Post, you do that at the LA Times, you do that at the New York Times, you do that at the Boston Globe. There's going to be a lot of them compared to that because people make mistakes. And so news is going to reflect that. But there will be, the imperative that the truth be told. And so I'm looking for that. I'm looking for a complicated truth that has nuance, there may be mistakes made, but accuracy is paramount.
I think actually the complicated truth is such a great phrase because I think a lot of people go to whatever sites they go to for their information to perpetuate how they already think. And what good journalism, at least it seems to me, should do is to complicate your thinking, is to maybe challenge some of those preconceived notions. Kevin, how do you keep from just oversimplifying something and perpetuating and oversimplifying?
Well, we know, man, the world is so complex. And the thing that we can do, we can get better. We're like every other industry, and I think it's important to, as long as we're still here, the LA Times has been here 140 years, celebrate our birthday last year. But, every period is challenging, has its own challenges. I think this period that we're in now, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation, really hard to, a lot of decline in trust in institutions. We see that in all the polling. And it's a really hard time to figure out. A lot of divisions in the country, a lot of change. And I think we have to rise to that challenge, as journalists, to help people navigate it and figure it out. I think we can listen more. I think we have the ability to get more feedback. One of the things we do at the LA Times, we started kind of community groups formed with people with all different kinds of interests and bringing them in, even in the Zoom, in the COVID era, by Zoom, and just listening to what people have on their minds, also explaining what we do. And I think we can be better because we have to be, in order to be the chroniclers of a really important time in our history and in a really delicate time, I think.
Yeah, you've touched on a number of things there. I read something recently that said, here are the 5 big concerns for the future of journalism. I'd love to hear you just kind of pick on any one of them, and both of you, and see what you think. One of them is that platform companies have control of access to audiences as opposed to a legacy news organization. So you publish something in the Washington Post. Somebody isn't going to see that necessarily because they're reading the Washington Post. They're going to see it because somebody retweeted it or posted it on Instagram or something else. So that platform company kind of controls access to the audience in many ways, as opposed to, I wonder what the LA Times has for today, or I wonder what the Washington Post has today. So that's one concern. Another is that algorithms are the things that determine now value and interest in the culture, as opposed to people sitting around a newsroom and saying, this is, doing that kind of agenda setting of human beings that used to happen. There's a waning public attention span, so there's that. Traditional business models just aren't working. We've alluded to that somewhat with the hard copy of a paper. And now these niche kinds of diversity kinds of areas as well. You want to pick any of those 5 and tell me Tell me why the world isn't ending?
Well, I mean, you just explained why we're here, why we're still in this business and profession. You know, all of these are challenges. So yes, check to all of those things. But I mean, I'll start with the one at the end about the revenue part of it, because we are a business, and man, we need people to subscribe. I mean, in the same way that they got newspaper subscriptions, we need them to have digital subscriptions. We need to get people who didn't grow up with a newspaper, for which that noun doesn't mean much to them. And we have to find ways to reach them. And sometimes we reach them on the platforms they are. They might be on Twitch or on TikTok or other platforms. So the platforms can aid us in the discovery of the LA Times. So that's one thing, but we have to also develop other revenue models, and that's why we have live events. And hey, that's why I want to do a soundtrack of LA. Maybe we can produce a Grammy award-winning album that we can produce. We do documentaries, or maybe we scripted kind of projects, movies, out of the journalism we do. And we license it to the studios. And so we have a hit Disney movie or a hit Netflix movie based on journalism that the LA Times does. So we have to figure out other revenue streams, other models, and also let people know that the journalism is the foundation of everything. But then we have other things to envelop the journalism, surround the journalism. The platforms, you know, that's a challenge for the Facebooks and others, because that's also Twitter. That's where a lot of the disinformation happens. You know, they happen on these platforms, and so disinformation needs to be policed. You know, and it needs to be rooted out, and it's very difficult to do that, because we're not going to be a really great society if we're an uninformed society. You know, is it the Washington Post that has the line, "Democracy dies in darkness"? Without an informed citizenry, democracy just simply doesn't work. And yet, there are a lot of places that look really convincing that are just not true. What do you do about that? What do you do about that, Donna Britt?
Kevin needs some time to think here. So what do you do about that, Donna Britt?
I try not to lose my mind over it. It's tragic, and it's so hard to combat. It's why forums like this feel important. I think about this a lot, and there aren't easy answers for me. You know, I'm glad that the platforms that I'm connected to work really hard to tell the truth, and for that to be their calling card, and for that to, and we were talking earlier about, you know, you want people to be smart, and to realize that a legitimate news organization is one that will tell the story that does not support what supposedly is their point of view. So when people talk about the liberal media, and they're talking about places like the Times and the Post and the New York Times, you're the Times is what I meant. Yeah, what they're not noticing is that those organizations are telling stories counter to what is a liberal story. You know, Hillary Clinton's emails was one of my favorite examples. That came from the Washington Post. You know, these stories I think I'm remembering that right. I read stories in the LA Times that do not support what would seem to be a liberal point of view. And that's how I know that I'm likely getting a much more accurate picture than one that tells me what I want to hear over and over again. And I'm happy to hear what I want to hear. I think a lot of us are, and that's part of why we're in trouble. And it's one of the things I liked about the tactile paper, was that when you go through that, you would have to bump into stuff you weren't that interested in, or stuff that wasn't important to you until you saw that story and you were forced to engage with it. And I think we're less forced to engage with that which we're uncomfortable with. And so one of the things I try to do as a writer, and you talked about my process, is to try to engage people on uncomfortable topics without attack and judgment and condemnation, because of I'm just so inspired and empowered by our samenesses as opposed to our differences. And the more we are open to each other, just the better off we are. I'm incredibly corny this way. But I think that the good stuff is corny, and I want more of that.
The good stuff is corny. That's good, but
Fred Rogers, the corniest man on earth, and what a model for it.
So, corny still matters. It still has value. I totally agree. I learned a lot about parenthood just reading your columns. I've never been a black woman. And yet, when I read what you've written about relating to your sons during difficult things, difficult conversations to have with your kids, difficult conversations to have with your husband, I learned something. So, and I wouldn't call it corny.
Thank you.
I call it insightful. Kevin, the LA Times started this social media thing called 404. Everything extremely LA, everything extremely online. It crashes together, it says, to make something new. Okay, there's no actual information in that description there. But then we've got creators, writers, artists, filmmakers, and puppets. What's going on there?
We have a puppeteer as part of it. I mean, that's part of. It started with an idea about a meme team. Memes are part of the sauce that's on the internet.
It's part of the grammar of how we relate to each other.
And so we started talking about that, and it really became we were creating a social content creation team, and
what does that even mean? A social content creation team?
Meaning,
what does that mean?
And we have somebody that is a whole new position that's overseeing this group, and so to make original work for social platforms. That's what it means. To produce original work for social platforms in the language and form that is consumed on social platforms. And so we started with Instagram and TikTok being the primary platforms. And so, the idea was to reach audiences not so much with the traditional model of social teams, was you produce your journalism in the Washington Post or LA Times, New York Times, and then you amplify it on the social platforms.
Yeah, you do it in this method that would work.
And you amplify, you push it out.
Right.
You link to it and you say some words and you share it. But this is, I think, increasingly the internet is a place that wants and rewards originality. And you need to make things that are just for the internet. And so the idea was not to simply was to use this team to create work around topics that is in the voice of all of these different creators that we're doing. And so it's an experiment. One thing that you have to do if you're in any kind of news, you have to experiment, you have to try things. And this was an experiment, and we got the team together, they went out and they're doing it. And I would still call it's something that's evolving. And one of them is Safi, my guy, the puppeteer, and I actually like him. He has a bit. There are others, and so everybody's practicing their craft on social platforms. And
are they reporting news?
Not news as we know it. No,
They're not covering a city council meeting with a puppet. Right.
Things that are just that's interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
things that happen. You know, and it could be about climate. It could be about it could be about the city council and the difference of our city council with other councils.
Mm-hmm.
It could be all kinds of things. But not so much. They're not trailing the work that we're producing and then taking that and amplifying it. They're trying to do original work.
Yeah, so this is actually a really good example of a way to think about journalism other than in this traditional way of a newspaper.
We have a lot of different ways. We have a utility journalism team. They are taking things that are explainers, and you might want to know something more about a particular news event, and they may give you a Q&A or
Mm-hmm.
an explainer or some maps and graphics that tell you more, and so we have a lot of different entry points to the LA Times.
Where's all this going?
Straight up,
What does that mean?
Well, I think that, to me, I think if you're building like a modern media company, then you need to have ways to reach an audience that did not come to you in the traditional ways, because that audience, unfortunately, is, getting older, and they're not going to be with us all the time. I mean, and so, you know, those of us who have kids and grandkids and others who are coming up, we still want the LA Times to be for them, you know, and even if they didn't have the chance to get that newspaper delivered to them and to pick it up and to sit there, you know, as I did with my dad and learn about it and share it and read it, and I still like to do it, but I want to give them a chance to absorb the LA Times in the ways that they want to absorb it, and that could be through our food coverage, you know, and we're working on our 101 list of the 101 best restaurants again, and cooking shows, you know, it could be through all kinds of different access points. Events for them might be poetry readings.
Yeah. And yet, there's still this really important function of accountability that news organizations hold the powerful accountable, just as you've been with the LA County Sheriff, for instance.
Yeah, we do some tremendous work there. The LA County, you know, largest sheriff's department in the country, been very much holding the sheriff's department accountable. We just did a tremendous investigative series, you know, on the cannabis industry, the legal and illegal cannabis industry, and that was, you know, months of reporting by, you know, our investigative group. Recently picked up an award for a series on extreme heat and just how it's not known the deaths by heat are much greater than the state, you know, said they were based on our reporting, and so it's just, there's a lot that you can do through reporting, but we can do, as you mentioned to Donna, some of other things. We have some tremendous columnists and people who write lovely features, and we can have an essay on what it's like to be lonely in LA, which is one of my favorite things last year. 21 ways to be lonely in LA if you like to be by yourself. So it's a lot of ways to come and a lot of entry points. So.
Yeah, I want to go back to the LA County Sheriff thing for a minute, because that reporter who has really held those folks accountable has paid a price for this. And it sounds, if I just look anecdotally, I'm wondering, is it getting more dangerous to be a reporter in the United States? Because her face, you know, was right there in the sheriff's presentation. She was basically called an enemy. And
yeah, our reporter Eileen Chekmedian is, you know, a tremendous reporter. One of the best beat reporters that I've seen. I've told her this many times. And yeah, we had a sheriff that, you know, called her out, had a criminal, you know, alluded that she was under criminal investigation for reporting about something, you know, that went on inside the jail and involving sheriff's deputies. And you know, she's been a relentless reporter. But to your point, we do worry about reporters. I mean, and we take steps to protect them. You know, one was killed in Las Vegas, not one of ours, right. But that was just the latest example of the threat to reporters for doing accountability reporting that's so needed in this country. So yeah, we take great measures to protect reporters, and we have a lot of reporters that no matter what, they're out trying to get the story.
We've alluded to business models, and we've got to do things differently. We can't just sell display ads, you know, to the furniture store, to the car dealership, or whatever, the way it used to. So we've got these different things going on. You've got events, you've got newsletters, all of that. But there are other models too. There's a nonprofit model. So Voice of San Diego, for instance, sort of an NPR kind of model. But the one that you all have, you've got this billionaire owner who, I mean, there's a history of that, of having wealthy people own a news organization. And how involved that billionaire owner or a family member might be, because there have been issues with that with the LA Times. Is that a sustainable thing, to have a wealthy owner who just kind of funds this thing?
Well, it is when you have a really great one, you know, like the Soon-Shons. You know, we'd all love, you know, if there was a Patrick and Michelle Soon-Shon and a lot of other cities, that would be a great thing. I also worked with Jeff Bezos when he bought the Washington Post. Whatever people think about Jeff Bezos, and lots of opinions about Amazon and other things, he's been a great, he backed the Washington Post. And Patrick also, you know, helped to lift the LA Times and the San Diego Union Tribune. And the San Diego Union Tribune. Yeah, he's helped to lift it and supported it and been there. You'd all like to have owners like that. And so, you know, the Henrys in Boston, the Boston Globe owners. But all billionaires not created equal. You know, like I say, there have been some that destroyed news organizations. So I'm glad. I think that is a model, and you would love to in the cities, whether it's Cleveland, Detroit, and other places. You know, you'd love for people to come in, because when you have local ownership, that's really people who know and they're of the place. They can really help to lift local news or start something new, as Stuart Bainham did in Baltimore. With the
Baltimore Banner is a great example.
Run by our former managing editor, Kimi Yoshino. So, and other places, the nonprofit model is a good model too. I support any model that helps lift local news. Capital B, which is I think partly based in Atlanta and partly based in New York, that's focusing on, you know, very black-oriented news, but there's been Chalk Beat, focus on education. There's been a lot of nonprofit models, and so yeah, I think that is a model.
Okay, so there's room for all of this.
There's room for it. We're in the for-profit business, so we've got to make money.
Yeah. As news people, as news organizations, what should we be doing that we aren't doing yet? Donna, let me start with you.
I'm struck by how, in some ways, the modern news organization, like the LA Times, is better than anything that came before it. You know, there are more offerings, there's more diversity, there's more points of access. It's just bigger and more vibrant than the newspapers that I loved and worked for could ever be. You know, the internet is like everything in human life. It's wonderful and it's total crap. And the wonderful part of that is wonderful enough that it deserves more attention. It deserves more subscriptions. It deserves more trust. And it's figuring out how to, and you know, I'm a tough judge on these things. I don't say that easily, but that's actually the truth. And convincing more people of that, and just to come in and observe and see that the truth of what I'm talking about. I think that's what needs to happen, is figuring out how to get the word out in ways, in this incredibly complex world that we live in.
You feel pretty strongly also, Donna, about citizens have a role to play here in how news happens. You think there ought to be more subscribers, right?
Absolutely, and not because, you know, that's what pays my bills ultimately, but because I want this society to work. You know, I have sons whose lives and interests I want supported. I have the most adorable grandson on earth. I want him to...
I'm going to challenge you, but go ahead.
Okay, let's say it's a tie. I look at, you know, all my friends, I look at people's babies and grandbabies, and I want this world to work. And I think the work that's happening at the best news organizations help to make this world more rather than less sustainable.
And the only way that's going to work is if people
absolutely
support it.
So that's figuring that out.
So Kevin?
Yeah, I think, look, a couple things that I think, and we're doing some of it, but we should do more. You know, I think we have to get closer to our communities. You know, I think we have to get closer to the readers and the readers that we would like. I mean, those that we don't have. We've got to go earn their support. We got to go to them and earn their support. You know, and I think we have to do that. There are lots of communities. LA is such a rich place just to start, but I think this is repeated in every community. There are places that are not connected to a news organization. Some people have no relationship to it. And so you've got to do things. Sometimes before you get them to subscribe, you got to do some other things. You know, I'm prepared to have some block parties, you know, for your kids. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes. And I think we have to do that, and sometimes turn the lens, give people the cameras themselves, let them record and document their own communities and find a way to bring that back and share it. So that's one thing, and I think partnerships. I mean, we're in a big place. We can't do it all ourselves. Sometimes we need to extend, we do some partnerships, but we need to extend the range of them and you know, sometimes partners with foundations and, you know, community-based places, other journalistic entities that we haven't partnered with before, and find sometimes ways to extend our reach. And those are two important things. And then I'm always about experimentation. It's just, this is the time we're living in. We just have to try things. You know, and then if they work, let's do more of them. And if they don't, let's try some other things.
I think that's just a really enlightened way to approach it. Would you thank Kevin and Donna for being here?
Thank you. Appreciate it.